So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Shawn, and also joining me today is Hima.
Hi, I'm Hima.
We are going to talk about building better buyer personas with AI, and I'll let Hima tell you a little bit about himself, and then we'll jump into it.
Great. I'm CEO of Hydra.ai. We empower sales, marketing, and customer success teams to build and deploy AI models in their funnel as easily as building a landing page.
Perfect. Thanks. And I'm Shawn. I'm principal at Capacity Flex, and I help companies build their pipeline by implementing sales enablement best practices, which results in more qualified leads and more predictable pipeline revenue. So today, we are going to get into a little agenda for today. It's going to run about 25 minutes, and we hope everything will be pretty straightforward. We're going to hold questions to the end, if that's okay. But feel free to add them to the chat window, and we'll review them as we finish up the presentation. So just diving right in here, we're going to talk today about SaaS metrics. We're going to start things off. I'm sure most of you are familiar with software as a service and the various metrics that you track. But there's probably here's some top level ones that probably matter most for a lot of companies. We're going to specifically focus on churn. Churn is one of those metrics that really you live and die by as a software company today. And without going into all the other details about the other metrics, they're equally important. And but today we're just focusing on churn. And the reason for that is because it's a really important metric when you have a better understanding of your customer base and the component personas that make that up. Because when you have a better understanding of your customers, you can actually start to develop strategies to address churn, reducing it, and ultimately, hopefully, improving customer loyalty. And so that's why we're going to focus on that today. So churn, what is it? How do you measure it? And what is its impact? So at a very high level, churn is can be defined in very basically as a rate of churn. It measures the number of customers that stop subscribing to your service for a given period of time. Now, today's conversation is about software, but if you're if you're a traditional business, it's that relies on repeat business. It's the number of customers that stop coming to your business. So it's a really basic metric, but it's something that can really help you understand what's happening at a very critical level with your business and the health of it. It's also, depending on the rate of churn, it starts to indicate or give indications to your sales and marketing team about where they need to go in terms of, how much sales they need to drive in a given period of time to not only make up lost customers, but also hit those revenue targets. And so if your revenue targets are increasing quarterly or annually, as most companies do, churn is an effective component of that, because it'll obviously make it more challenging if your sales team is underperforming in those situations. So to calculate churn, it's really quite easy. You take a period of time. So given that we're talking about software as a service, we'll take a month, or could be in a year. But for the sake of this argument, we'll use a month. And you count the number of customers you have at the beginning of that period. So for this example, let's say it's 100. And let's say over the next 30 days, you lose 10 customers. And so really the calculation is simple math here. You effectively have a churn rate of 10%, which means you'll start the next period, the next month, with 90 customers. So you can quickly see how, if you're not making up those customers, in the next month or the next sales period that you're adding new customers to your service, you're quickly going to run out of customers. And so it's a pretty basic way to start to look at your business and to help you understand what's going on. Just depending on how customers subscribe to your service, you can measure churn as an aggregate rate, probably on a monthly basis, or it could be on an annual as well. And that'll give you a metric like annual customer churn rate or monthly customer churn rate, etc. So why are we talking about churn? Well, we want to understand more about it. We want to understand, what are the signs that customers are leaving you? You're having some attrition there, and what can you do about it? More importantly, so first off, I guess it's important to say that a certain amount of churn is normal and expected. I mean, customers come and go for various reasons, and usually it has nothing to do with your product. But if you see a rise in your customer attrition rate, then you probably want to spend some time figuring out what's going on here, and understand if there's anything you can do about it. So, what's a normal rate of churn? There's some debate about this, and obviously it'll depend on the specific company. In your case, might be slightly different, but somewhere between 5 and 7% is generally considered normal. Might be slightly higher depending on the type of service you offer or the type of software subscription model you use. Might be slightly lower depending on your situation. And so that unique business situation is really going to determine what's the right rate of churn for you. And of course, if you're a startup, you're gonna need to be watching this KPI pretty closely, because it's going to vary wildly. But eventually, it'll settle down, and you'll get an indication of what's a normal range for your business. If you start to see churn going up, some things to think about is, did something happen with your product? Did you have an outage? Did you was there a blip in the Amazon S3 cloud that affected your customers' experience using your product? Did you introduce some new features, maybe that people are finding useful, but maybe a little bit more confusing? Did you take something away from your product? Did you change your pricing model? What are the things that may, if you see a quick jump, or the corollary would be a drop in churn, like what happened there? So start to look at what's happening and try and understand that. You also might want to think about, from your customer's perspective, what's happening. Has there been an economic event that has changed how they're approaching this, or did one of your competitors launch a new product that your customers are interested in, and maybe they're trying it out? So these are some things to think about. A couple other ways to think about churn in terms of other metrics are monthly recurring revenue and annual recurring revenue, or MRR and ARR. And these, again, are pretty standard metrics. I had them up earlier. But depending on your subscription model, whether that's a month-to-month model, or year-to-year or multi-year contract model, if you're a larger company, you're going to see churn represented in slightly different ways, and obviously that'll have an impact on your revenue and how you measure that. So the reason I wanted to talk about that is that you're going to see, these trends are going to be slightly different depending on what your model is. So if you're a smaller business, typically delivering a service month to month, churn could vary within a certain range that you'll define as normal. But it might look quite different than if you have annual customers. Now, a lot of software companies have a mix of both, and so you'll need to measure churn in slightly different ways for both cohorts, and that's something to think about. You're also going to see churn perhaps affected by slightly different timings of when customers are using your product. You might, month to month, they might be using it on a shorter period of time, but very intensely. Annual subscription models might see customers use the product regularly, but not necessarily, it's a mission critical function, but it may not be something that they're using daily. But you want to start to pay attention to how people are using your product, how active they are, and start to understand what they're doing with your product. It's really, really important to understand, if your customers are leaving you, that it's almost too late to start to address that if you're coming up to a renewal period at the end of a 12-month contract and starting to address those issues in the 11th month. So you really want to start to pay attention to these things as early on as you can. Just jumping in here, stickiness is a really big thing around software, especially SaaS software. We're starting to hear a lot more about consumption rates and how people are using the product, and this is, again, related to churn. If you're keeping track of how your customers are engaging with your product, you're going to have a much better understanding of where the pain points are from the customer's perspective and how you can address that. So how is your onboarding process? Is it easy to deploy? Is it easy to train people and get them using it quickly? Do you have a lot of integrations and partnerships that help make your product sticky? Ultimately, you're trying to make a product that your customers love and want to tell all their friends about, so they buy it too. But how are you making it also sticky beyond just the product itself? Partnerships and integrations with other products that make your product part of your customers' overall software stack is a really great way and great strategy to follow if you want to ensure that your product is being used as effectively as possible by your customers. Finally, how's it being consumed and how are people talking about it? What's the adoption rates and how are people actually recommending it? So looking at customer feedback that you're getting, whether that's net promoter score, surveys, other measures of customer satisfaction you might get. Maybe it's simple email or feedback in terms of custom testimonials or customer referrals. Your customers are telling you what they love about your product and also what they don't like about it. And so take the time to go through that, because there's a lot of gold that's hiding in those hills, and you want to take the time to understand it and unearth it. And you might discover that a simple change in how you're deploying your product or how you're structuring it decreases churn overnight. And so take the time to figure that out. And this is a really great bridge, actually, to understanding, customer personas and how this affects how we address and strategize around churn. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, and Hima's going to take it over and talk a little bit more about the data side of things. So just give me a moment, and this should hopefully be painless. And Hima, it should be over to you.
Thank you, Shawn.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep, I can, definitely.
Great. Okay, so getting to know the people behind your SaaS metrics and their behavior indicators are definitely an important step towards tackling churn. So one of the most commonly used devices for understanding customers are customer personas. So you're familiar with customer personas. You have a set of well-described customer personas somewhere in your Google Drive or Dropbox, maybe, and you probably developed these through a series of customer development interviews, surveys, and by making a set of sensible assumptions. So traditional customer personas are based on demographic and firmographic data with hints of personality traits like what kind of things people like, dislike, etc. A key benefit of developing customer personas is that it forces us to establish a shared understanding of our perceived customer characteristics. These then influence our product design choices, generate empathy, and shape the marketing narrative that we use. However, traditional customer personas don't give us anything actionable as businesses evolve. Actionable as in helping us steer engagement or helping us drive customer happiness. So as an example, in one of the persona discovery projects we worked on for an electric vehicle manufacturer, they had their customer personas defined as high net worth individuals in a major metropolitan area. And a series of marketing campaigns were designed around these assumptions. So one of the drastic differences that we see from a couple of years ago to now is that companies actually capture a lot more customer characteristics and behavior data than ever before. This information is locked in at various systems like your CRM, your email, chat conversations, and help desk tickets, or even like analytics databases. So hidden in these troves of data are very valuable insights, like what really are the characteristics of your customers, going beyond the set of assumptions you made, the interviews or the surveys, and more importantly, how do they feel about your company, your product, and the brand at that given point of time? So what if you factor in insights from these data sources into persona development? Your new data-driven customer personas can use signals like sentiment, intent, and affinity on top of all the traditional factors. A couple of important things to note here. One, they're derived rather than assumed. What we mean by that is you'll really be looking at your true and actual customer data and extracting the characteristics and extracting the definitions of these customer personas rather than making a series of assumptions upfront. And they are actionable, as in if the sentiment is turning negative and the engagement is declining, we can design an engagement sequence to target that someone of that persona to address that specific scenario. And they are evolving. Unlike your traditional customer personas, data-driven personas are derived. So as your business mature or introduce new products or go into new markets, you can easily generate the personas that reflects the current truth of your business and about your customers. Going back to my earlier example of the electric vehicle manufacturer I mentioned, we learned based on their data that their ideal target persona is not high net worth individuals from major metros, but upper middle income people from second tier cities. And we were able to advise them where to focus their engagement efforts based on this discovery. Probably the most common question I get asked when we talk about data-driven personas is that, do I have enough data? The value is clear, they are actionable, they are derived, and they are evolving. So do I have enough data to create these personas? And the answer is always yes and no. It's yes, because if you're a company with product market fit and have been serving more than a handful of early adopters, you have the engagement data, the funnel data, and usage data to draw some insights from. It's no, because you can always have more data. But that's something we can work on. So here are a couple of options that you can look into as you get underway with the data-driven persona development and looking to get your arms around your data sources. The first one is you can start with the tools and systems that you already have in place and review whether they're optimally set up to capture meaningful data. So as an example, if you're using an email tracking tool, are those events actually being recorded in the CRM, or are they just flashing alerts that go away, just notify you at the moment? Second, there are various data sources that you can use to expand the understanding of your customers. As an example, if you're in B2B, our data sources can find revenue numbers, employee counts, and sector classifications, and much more from just based on the domain name of someone. If you're in B2C, you can use an email address to find someone's brand affinities, age bracket, location, work history, so on and so forth. And some of these data sources might even be free. So going back to the previous custom example, we had the customer and prospect zip codes. So we were able to correlate that to the US Census database to find the median income of someone's neighborhood and also the population density, which as it turned out, were like very telltale signs whether someone's likely to place a pre-order with them. Third, you can institute a planned data collection strategy that gets baked into your customer onboarding process or customer support process. This could be context-based feedback or tracking more nuanced usage data to create a more complete and meaningful data picture about your customers. And so let's talk about getting underway with this process. And there are a couple of challenges to work through as you build data-driven personas. The very first one is data challenges. One of the common ones is that you may have noisy data that requires cleaning up. This includes duplicate events, data points without any useful identifiers, and so on. So there needs to be a process to clean up the data and get it to a workable state. Second, you might be using SaaS or other software products which have a large amount of important data, but some of these systems may not provide an easy way of exporting them for analysis. Here we're talking about data format issues, availability issues, and completeness issues. In some cases, you can get around these challenges by doing some custom development through APIs to extract this data. And third, you may have some important data points with missing links. A common scenario is that companies track events during the marketing funnel before someone sign up as a customer separately with separate set of IDs, and after sign up completely separately. So you don't have a good way of linking the journey prior to making a purchase and journey after making a purchase, which leaves out a lot of valuable data in a state that we can't really use. So let's jump in and look at a couple of challenges related to developing the actual personas based on our enriched and cleaned up data. So this is where we put AI and machine learning techniques to good use. At this stage, one of the key focus areas is understanding which features and characteristics are important for conversion, for churn, or any other meaningful customer lifecycle events in your business. If you had done a good job of understanding various characteristics available, you may be dealing with dozens or even hundreds of various characteristics to choose from. And second, we have to understand the relative importance of various characteristics to each other. So going back to the previous example, the population density and median income it's important to understand which one of these two are meaningful in indicating someone's persona over the other. And then you can use AI and machine learning to understand the makeup of various clusters that show meaningful link to customer lifecycle event. That is, then you have a set of data-driven personas. A couple of beautiful things about using data-driven personas is that it gives you the capability to detect in real time which persona someone belongs to the moment they enter their customer journey with your company. So rather than reporting after the fact, you can detect early on which feature set might someone resonate with, or which product might someone will be interested in, and proactively engage them with hyper-targeted messaging, driving conversion, reducing churn, and supporting these various lifecycle events as you'd like to navigate your customers through. So that's a quick roundup of data-driven customer personas and challenges that you need to go through to build them, and a couple of key benefits of using data-driven personas.
Great, thanks, Hima. That was excellent. We had one question just come up through one of the participants here today, and they just wanted to know how you what's the best format for approaching a data persona, for creating a data-driven persona? Do you start with, you mentioned email, you mentioned some of the other features, but what's the basic element you need? Is it just email?
Sure. So it's very dependent on the type of business, your primary mode of interaction with customers. So if your primary mode of interaction with customers are emails, that's a great place to start. But in some cases, like it could be related to email, but newsletter engagement. It could be just site visits and other chat conversations. It depends quite a bit on your business case. A lot of times you also have to start with what you have and figure out what's meaningful that can be captured from there, and work through the data capturing journey from that point onwards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fantastic. And maybe just a note, obviously we are looking at a number of different elements here, but there's a lot going on daily in terms of the changes in privacy law, and so I guess there may be some considerations around that. Maybe that's something we could cover off in a future webinar. Looks like we have another question here. I have data and I know it's valuable, but my resources are limited and I don't know how to handle the different types of data from various sources. Any advice or suggestions? Is AI limited to large businesses, or can a small company take advantage of this? Excellent question. Thanks.
Sure. So even a small company can take advantage of this. So that's where like platforms like Hydra come into play, where it make it easy for anyone to build and deploy AI in their workflow without having data scientists or machine learning engineers in-house. So if you're a small company, going back to data, there are a lot of ways that you can capture more meaningful data and expand your customer understanding, expand your data through various other data sources. And then there are ways that you can implement the personas, implement the messaging in a way that's cost efficient and fits your scale.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. That's great. Well, it looks like we don't have too many other questions coming in right now. So hopefully that means everyone had a good understanding of everything today, and is excited about the potential of AI and developing data-driven buyer personas. We'd love to follow up with you. So anybody on today's webinar will follow up and include some more information for getting in touch with us if you have any further follow-up questions. And just wanted to thank you for your time today. So thank you, Hima, for doing this with me today. And thanks everyone for being here and listening to us.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Take care, everyone.